you know, is Jesus God? And then you wrestle with, okay, is he just an archetype of, again, divine order?
Whoa, let's break that down for a second real quick, because I mean, what you're saying, first of all, like opens up a train of thought that most of us aren't even privy to, where you talked about Jesus being an archetype for a divine order of thinking. So I mean that type of thought doesn't like change or really question the concept of, you know, how people quote unquote look at Jesus. But are you trying to say that the concept of, not say the concept of Jesus, because Jesus wasn't his actual historical figure, but the consciousness that, you know, he was given as the anointed one, being Christ, is that more of the archetype? Is that the archetype that we're talking about, or is it actual the human form in Jesus himself?
Right. I'm talking about the consciousness and how Jesus operates in life, how Jesus walks, talks, and interacts with structures, not only structures but with individuals, and just wrestling with that whole what Jesus as the divine. What does that mean for us in 21st century?
Well, let's go back then. I mean, one thing you talked about was structures. You just said the type of structure that he dealt with. So, I mean, given the context of the community that he was in, you know, being Jerusalem under Roman empirical rule or influence, what type of structures was he aiming at, or is he speaking against, or advocating in that case?
I go with Oprah Hendricks. Jesus was a political revolutionary. Because, you know, if you're dealing with this Roman system of government and the different levels of dehumanization, or the different structures that cause people to be oppressed, and, you know, and we can jump to 21st century. Jesus transcends those oppressive structures and walks in a different mindset. Again, consciousness. You know, when we talk about consciousness, and then calls other folks to come up to that level of consciousness where we're not just thinking about, you know, the temporary fix or the immediate gratification, but he's calling us to a whole different level of understanding of self, of community, and how to create another community, maybe outside of the structure that they're already living in. So,
could that be what is the undertone of him saying that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, or some translations say the ringdom of God is at hand?
I think so. But again, we have to. Again, what I said earlier is we have to slow down and tap into what is the universe. You know, what is the universe saying? How are we in touch with what the universe is living and moving and progressing towards? And are we aligned with the universe, or are we in opposition to divine order?
Well, if you're making all this grand talk about the awareness of the universe, then how do we break through that? Because again, we alluded to Jesus talking about, you know, all forms of structure. So if the structure is a representation of, one, the culture that we live in, and two, you know, like the subcultures or groups that we, you know, ascribe to in those particular traditions and understandings, what are some Jesus-like or Christ-like ways that we can identify, you know, all of these physical structures that undermine our ability to raise ourselves to that Christ-like consciousness in the 21st century, of course. No, yeah, you were talking about how you say Jesus like spoke against structures, so to speak, so people can analyze essentially how they look at everything in the natural and versus how things should be seen and or acted upon in the spirit. You know, Matthew does a really good job of that, because the whole motif behind Matthew, you know, paints Jesus as a liberator You know, I mean, yes, there are miracles and things of that nature, but more specifically, they're looking at the practical action and practical knowledge that he gave to people that inspired a change in the way of thinking from, as actually a lot of commentaries say, you know, empirical ways of thinking, as in the actual Roman Empire's way of acquiring wealth and obtaining and maintaining personal wealth and personal knowledge, versus what Christ was offering, or what Jesus was offering, saying that you should have the mind of Christ, or the kingdom of heaven, where you should actually not be compelled by the cultural influences that are around you, but actually compelled by the Spirit of God, which will essentially serve as an antithesis or be diametrically opposed to a natural way of metropolitan thinking, which is to get what you want or what you need out of life and be focused on yourself first and then others second, when it's supposed to be other first and self second. Like the motif is actually painted very well, where this whole conflict between the, you know, Jesus of Nazareth as a representation of the kingdom of heaven versus the actual kingdom of Israel. I mean, not Israel, the kingdom of the Roman Empire. Where, I mean, it starts right at his birth, where it talks about when Jesus was born in chapter 2, where the wise men came to see him, and then Herod was frightened based on this insight that a new king was coming. And you know, for us who do know, you know, Herod went to he pulled out an executive order to actually kill all of the young men born within a certain time window so he could hopefully catch and kill Jesus. You know, we include this in his birth narrative, so to speak, you know, under this divine umbrella, and it's not to change that, but in a more practical understanding is, as the book of Matthew was written, they're trying to tell us that there are literally two kingdoms that are trying to win over, so to speak, your soul, or win over how you conduct yourself. And as we see, Herod, who's a representation of like the Roman Empire, is literally trying to stop, you know, a messenger that will raise the awareness of people to God, so that they become more spiritual versus more natural minded. And so, I mean, it is in what, chapter 2, yeah, the visit of the wise men, all the way through verse pretty much 15. Actually, you can go through the whole chapter, but specifically, you know, in verse 2 it says, "Where is the child who has been born of the King of Jews? For we observed this star and its rising, and we come to pay no homage, and we came to pay him homage. And King Herod heard this, and he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem was with him. And calling together all of the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, so that it would be written." And so jump down to 7, and it says, "Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And they sent him to Bethlehem, saying, 'Go and search diligently.' But moving on, when they finally found out what the king wanted, which was to give a report back to exactly where he was so he could be assassinated, they went back another way." So, I mean, there's a lot of symbolism, you know, that's usually preached, you know, in this particular section of scripture, but it actually opens up, you know, the story as far as Matthew shows how there's a physical, you know, empire that is controlled by our senses, so to speak, you know, and that should lead us in how we are supposed to be as far as the metropolitan terms. But there's also a different way of living, which undermines all of those things, which is always under attack, which is exemplified through Jesus. So, I mean, that's just one there, but what do you think about that?
I'm looking at, just thinking about what you said and where Jesus, the situation that Jesus was born in, these two kingdoms. Again, Jesus is born not in the high places, but in the low places. How this liberator is not born in privilege, but among common folks, and how, you know, this anointed person could come from modest means and normal circumstances to confront and to overthrow the mindset of privilege. And so, to me, it just continues to inspire me to think about, actions. How do I participate in empire? And how do I participate in privilege? And what ways do I need to dissect myself from these practices that continue to hurt humanity?